Hello, I'm Harry Richardson, and I'm here today with Edward Schuller of the Red Union. Am I correct in that?
Correct. Yeah, the Teachers Professional Association, so part of Red Union. Good to be with you, Harry.
Thank you very much. And we're here today to talk about, in part, the union movement as a whole, and Edward's new venture as a more independent sort of a union, and also how this has been affected by the sort of the multicultural zeitgeist and paradigm that we're living in today. So I'll just start off by asking you, Ed, there's dozens of unions, and for disclosure, I was actually a union delegate for around 10 years in the AMWU, metals industry, the Amalgamated Metal Workers Union. There are dozens and dozens of different unions. What is it that makes your union different?
Yeah, well, we started in 2012, so still relatively new as a nurses union only. And then we moved into being able to provide an alternative union for teachers as well in 2019. So that's sort of the education part is sort of what I focus on, but I
Hmm.
work across sort of our broader operations, which is in nursing, teaching, policing as well, and also doctors and independent workers. So most people can join us. What makes us different is that we are far more affordable because we aren't affiliated with the Labor Party. We're not affiliated with any political party. So we don't give our money to them. We don't run third party campaigns for them or left wing social political causes. We focus on trying to deliver the service of the union, which is so important, particularly in today's day and age, that, workers pay you to do. So we have the controversial view, Harry, that you don't get to just waste your members' money and campaign on stuff that they probably don't agree with anyway.
That was actually a big bugbear. When I was working, I was in the union, and of course I had superannuation. I had some shares of various companies, savings and things like that, investments, and it used to stick in my craw that I'd give money to the unions and they'd take a chunk of that money and give it to the Labour Party without asking me. And then the companies that I'd invested would take a chunk of my money and give it to the Liberal Party without asking me. And I just think, well, supposing I was a Greens voter or One Nation or whoever, I mean, whatever you vote, I mean, where do these people get off thinking that they can just take money from people and just spend it on what they want? Like this, we're gonna take your money and give it to a charity of our choice or a political movement of our choice. That struck me as it should have been. And I still think it should be illegal to take someone else's money and donate it to a political party without their consent.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. And it's done in such a sneaky way where, like I said, we represent nurses and teachers. The majority don't even know that it's happening a lot of the time. Like they sort of say, oh, well, the
Absolutely.
union's going on about
Mm,
this sort of political issue. It's not really
mm,
relevant, but
mm.
well, they're not necessarily affiliated with the Labor Party. The Labor Party exists because it was the political arm of the union movement. That's
Yeah,
how the Labor Party in Australia and most
yeah,
Labor parties in the West come
yeah.
to come. So the sneakiest way that they're doing it now is the most effective, which is, as you mentioned, superannuation. So basically, since the 90s in particular, it's ramped up where you've got super, basically mandated,
C-bus.
basically mandated industry super, where the employees' money is going, at least 12% of it now. And it's compulsory for a reason. It's another way to be able to control wealth and control policy because you've got these big funds that basically say you've got to bend the knees to these ESG requirements a lot of the time,
Mm.
environmental, social, and governance. And basically, it's this left-wing doctrine that you say, if you're not going to do this, they're saying this to companies, we're not going to invest. So that makes the companies, that forces a political agenda onto different companies, whether it's mining, manufacturing, whatever it might be, agricultural. It's completely captured by over $4 trillion worth of wealth in industry super now in Australia. And again, most workers don't know that that's happening. It's really egregious.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, this is workers' money. And the unions I've always found are completely cavalier with workers' money. They just treat it as if it's their own. So on that issue, I mean, what strikes has always struck me as odd is that all of these the unions are representing people who generally, like, I mean, there's different unions. The white collar ones are probably a little different, but certainly the militant ones, like I was involved in, are representing what was originally a white working class and supposedly representing their interests. And they are donating to a Labour Party which has gradually come around to a position which is not that far different from the Liberal Party, to be honest, which is almost a hatred, visceral hatred of the white working class. And they've managed to pull this off while retaining the loyalty of these white workers who are like, oh yeah, the unions are really looking after us. The Labour Party is really looking after us. And it's like, and we've got things like in the workplace, they're pushing things like this EEO or equal opportunities and DEI of the AO, which is all basically taking jobs from white people and giving them to people with protected characteristics, or white men in particular. There's this ethnic hierarchy that's like an inverted hierarchy where the majority seems to be on the bottom, and they're saying, well, look, this is, they have this weaponized victimhood of people who they say are disadvantaged, and so we have to take from you and give to these disadvantaged people. But there's no real proof of the fact that these people are necessarily disadvantaged, or it's like, oh well, overall there's some disadvantage, or we found some disadvantage here, and therefore we're taking money and jobs and things off you. How do you see that sort of playing out within your unions, at least?
Yeah, well, I mean, that sort of thing we're strongly against. I mean, we're proud, we're patriotic Australians, and we want Australia to remain Australia. And if you've got, unfettered immigration as we do at the moment, completely changing the culture and identity of our country, then it's not going to be our country anymore. It's not going to be the nation of Australia. But you're right in talking about how the unions do it, the mainstream unions do it, always in the name of social justice. So they're never going to say, oh, we're trying to kick down the local populace or anything like that, the native populace. They say it's always in the name of social justice, and social justice has always been a pillar for the union movement, basically because it's about, trying to bridge income inequality and making sure that workers aren't being taken advantage of and ripped off, which is actual social justice. When you compare that to what it has become over the last 30, 40 years, why is the war over in the Middle East relevant to nurses and teachers here on a day-to-day basis? Should their members' money be going to fund that, to fund campaigning on that? Should it be going into, like you said, the DEI stuff, diversity, equity, inclusion, all of the gay pride marches that these unions go to? They're all getting paid a lot of the time. The left-wing social campaigns, same-sex marriage, legalizing prostitution, all of the transgender stuff as well. So it's always done through the lens of social justice, but it has nothing to do with the worker that they actually represent in any given industry, which again is just why it's sort of becoming callous, because I think a lot of people in the union movement know what they're doing now. They're not even confusing themselves, but they've got the workers being taken for a ride still. So that's why we exist, Harry, is because we don't do that, because there's clearly a need for unions. There always will be. It's a thoroughly important and noble thing to ensure that we're looking after the working class and basically making sure that they don't get ripped off, which is the incentive in capitalism. We can be honest, that is the incentive for workers to get ripped off by corporations, and that's why unions have to exist. But they don't have to operate the way that they're doing now, because you basically got these union executives and the Labor Party, who is obviously, holds executive positions in different unions and vice versa. They're basically playing the role of the corporation now and ripping off the union, the union workers. So it is pretty bad stuff. But we've obviously seen an influx in growth. We're only 13 years old, coming up on 14 years now. And we represent over 25,000 workers in Australia, 18,000 of which are in Queensland, where we originally started. And obviously we're looking to replicate that across the country. And there's such a demand for it as well.
Brilliant. This is the odd thing with unions. When I was in the union, I always used to try and impress on people that a union is a capitalist institution. I used to compare them to a real estate agent. I used to say to people, look, if you want to sell your house, you go and get a real estate agent. He's an expert in selling houses. If you want to sell your labor, join a union, and the union is there supposedly to represent you. Now, as a lot of people would understand, when you go to a real estate agent, his first interest is not necessarily in selling your house for the best price. And unfortunately, the same applies to the union. And whereas with real estate agents, people don't have any illusions to the same extent. Whereas with the unions, people have this idea that, oh no, the unions are pure as the driven snow or whatever. And having been on and to an extent on the inside, I was a delegate, which isn't really in the working sort of thing. But I saw what was going on, and it used to annoy me. We'd have delegates or so forth that would be standing out, screaming and I'm going to go in there and tell the boss this. And you go into a meeting and they're like, oh, excuse me, Mr. Scrivener, would it be okay if we, and then they come out and go, yeah, we told them, there's a lot of this grandstanding. It's really quite pathetic. And people don't realize the extent of this, with these so-called, these union guys who are like, oh, I'm so tough. It's like, of course you're tough. You're working for a union. If you can't get fired by my boss, it's like, so seeing the negotiations and seeing what these guys would say to the actual workers was like, it used to really get to me sometimes.
And we've got an inside view as well now because we're able to bargain in pretty much most jurisdictions as a union. And seeing them at the table, they generally don't want to be in the same room as us. They don't want to have the same, they don't want to even be within the vicinity of the conversations that we're having about reforming the system, cutting waste, all of that sort of stuff to benefit the frontline workers of any given industry. Because they're so happy with the entrenched failure of the health system, the education system, because they're making a ton of money on it. And we've had people from traditional unions, executives come on to ours. So we've got a teacher in Canberra, Glenn Fowler, used to be the president of the Australian Education Union. And I tell you what, it's very interesting hearing the way that they operate, the funneling of money that goes through that's not on the books, which is what we talk about, because they'll often say, like I cite, there's about $700 million every single year in overcharged fees across the union movement that funnels through to left-wing social and political campaigns. Some of that's a very small part is donations to the Labor Party through the Council of Trade Unions and the state bodies, but the majority of it, like 90% of it, is far and away the campaigning capabilities that they give, the phone canvassing, the helping out on election day. And the third-party campaigns are the biggest one. They do this in every single state and federal election. They run third-party campaigns to help the Labor Party, but it seems independent enough and it does sway a lot of uninformed voters into believing that it's actually a genuine community movement, whereas, they're in the same room hatching up these plans, the Labor Party and the union. So
it's very sad because a lot of the people in the union movement are really decent people who've come in and really believe in it and work hard. And as you say, their efforts and resources are being stolen really in a way by these ideologues, these hard left ideologues who are often Anglophobic and anti-white as well. Yeah. It's a classic Marxist tactic of the oppressor and the oppressed. There's always this sort of, what they call it, there's words for it in Marxism. I'm not
a victim class.
Yeah. So the actual splitting things into two of the oppressed and oppressed. I can't think of the word for it right now. Marx isn't one of my favorite people. I've tried to read Marx and I got about 2 pages in before I got a headache. It's just garbage.
Marx is one of my favorite people. That's
how this garbage could have affected. People could actually take it seriously. It's utterly beyond me. And Marx himself was a disgusting character. He was like, he had a servant. This is we've got to help the oppressed classes. He has a servant. He knocked her up, refused to admit it was his child, and I think he had syphilis as well. He's like full of boils, and he's a disgusting character. It wouldn't work in an iron lung, as we used to say. And that was why, talking incessantly about workers' rights. Never worked a day in his life. Spent other people's fortunes and so forth. So he's such a typical rich kid, actually. A lot of these people who are in these social justice movements are just rich kids. I think, if you remember, there was a young lady in the UK who was gluing herself to the pavement for Just Stop Oil, and demanding that everyone, climate change this and that. And then she flies off to Bali for a holiday from the UK. It's like, hello. And you imagine if someone had glued themselves to the runway and her plane couldn't take off, she'd have been like, how dare you? So the level of hypocrisy in these things is just disgusting. But like some of the things that I think that the union movement really dropped the ball. One is overseas qualifications in health. And we had some years ago, and I don't know whether people from outside of Queensland or younger viewers might remember this, but there was a gentleman by the name of Jayant Patel, who was a surgeon in Maryborough, somewhere a little north of Brisbane, a little regional hospital. And he was promoted somehow to be the head of some kind of surgery and was a disaster. He ruined umpteen lives. I think he killed a number of people, and he had been struck off previously.
Yeah. By Harper,
You know,
yeah.
so I have heard again, this is anecdotally, but I've heard tales of people in Asia and subcontinent and things having qualifications which are corrupt. They're not passing the same levels, and then they're bringing them in and they're working in our hospitals. Whereas, someone, a traditional Australian, would have to go to university, pass exams, and then go through stringent tests, and people are failing this and being usurped by people from overseas whose qualifications are really bogus. Is that a thing, or am I just being
That's massive. That's massive,
right.
Particularly in construction. I got a lot of mates that work in construction as well, and chatting to them, there is a of the people that are coming in. It's actually one of the myths about skilled immigration at the moment. Of the immigrants that are coming in that are skilled, 2% of them are skilled in construction. And that skill, like you said, the training, the qualifications are completely different. They basically have to be completely retrained when they get here. So they're actually a burden. They're actually a burden on the economy coming in. They're not helping it. And again, they're filling positions that we should be encouraging native Australians to actually work in. So we see it in education, we see it in health, where governments have created such a poor system because it's so bloated, because there's so much waste, because there are union reps or just high ups in the department that are getting paid 200, 300 grand a year to do sweet FA. And then they come around and say, oh, we've got a teacher shortage crisis. Oh, we've got a nurse shortage crisis. Let's import all of these nurses and teachers from elsewhere. Don't talk about the fact that they need reskilling completely. Don't talk about the fact that they need homes to live in. Their families need homes to live in. All of this sort of stuff. So I think it comes back, a lot of the immigration debate comes back to a lot of government inefficiency and a pure plan from the government to firstly create artificial scarcity in the housing market, and also to do the same in the job market, where they're bringing in these people that aren't qualified, that aren't able to do the work that a native Australian should be encouraged to do. So that's sort of where we're at the moment. You're not imagining that at all.
I know myself, this is a huge, because today I do, one of the things I do is training. I train people in construction related activities like driving forklifts and things like that. There are, we get all the time people coming through from Colombia and this and that, Nepal and other people, or India, obviously, and Pakistan, China, and often they're not qualified at all, and they get taken on by these companies, which have front companies, which are RTOs and things like registered training organisations, and the whole thing's just set up as a complete scam to bring these completely unqualified people in, supposedly train them. They're like, oh, they're coming in for education, and they're actually the education institution is an RTO that teaches people to be painters, to house painters. It's like, why do we need someone who's not a house painter to come in and be trained in Australia as a house painter and then set to work? I find this sticks in my craw, especially with the unions, that the unions are promoting this. Clearly, Marx and Marxists tend to be economically illiterate, but supply and demand is not that hard to understand. No. If you have more supply of something, the price tends to drop. Labor isn't. The union likes to pretend that labor is something completely different. It's not. It's an input. And if you have one guy knocking on your door saying, I'm going to mow your lawn, you're going to negotiate a price. But if there's 10 guys knocking on your door saying, I want to mow your lawn, you're in a much stronger position, obviously. And this, again, this tends to be, these are people are desperately trying to bring in low-skilled people with obviously poor English skills. So they're not competing for those jobs that you're talking about often in the bureaucracy or the higher echelons at this stage. But these people are feeding the crocodile, I feel. Like that's going to come back and bite them, because once these people get their feet under the table and they know what they're doing, they will be turfing these people out of their own positions, and they'll be like, oh, what happened? Oh, they took my job, as Pat would say.
People were saying that 5 years ago. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so it's so cruel that the union are supporting this, and to be fair, the Liberals were no better, because then the Liberals are at the other end. They've got the corporations saying, hey, cheap free labour. Like I was talking to someone about trying to contact Gina Reinhardt at one stage. She said, maybe we could talk to Gina Reinhardt. She might have an understanding. He said, no. He said, Gina actually she was paying for and promoting conferences of high status people, trying to figure out how we can have a big Australia. She desperately wants 50 million upwards in Australia. Probably, I would assume she wants, lower value people from Philippines or China working in the mines for low, bringing down those wages so she can get them digging up ore for her at cheaper prices and shipping it to China. I mean, these people have absolutely no morals at all. They have no, because from our perspective, from my perspective, I think it's as immoral to betray or have no sympathy for your own people, to an extent almost as if you were betraying your own family. It's like people understand that if you were to betray your own children, like if the I mean, I don't hate anyone else's children, but if I'm on the Titanic and it's going down and there's one spot on the lifeboat, my daughter's getting in there. Not because I hate other people's children, but because she's my child. And imagine if you didn't, if you said, "Oh, sorry, darling, I'm going to put someone else's child in there," and then eventually you do survive. How would your children say, "Oh, that was a really moral thing to do"? No, they say, "What the hell were you thinking? You're supposed to be my father." And the British Australian community that I represent, we feel the same about our ethnic group, you could call it, like the traditional nation. We don't hate other people, but we feel that we should be, that people generally should be preferencing their own people, and everybody else does, like Indians do that, Chinese do that, and nobody minds that. Maoris do that, whatever, but then they say, "Oh, but if you do it, that's awful. It's Nazi. It's this or that." And your people have been particularly bad throughout history. It's like, really? Have you ever studied history? Have you ever seen the people that these other, how these other people behave?
Ending slavery is bad, all that sort of stuff. Yeah, they won't say it, but they'll gloss over all the good things.
Really. When you actually look into some of these things, I mean, I did a big study of Islam, and that was what partly what woke me up to this. Is like, when people are saying, white people have been so bad, I'm like, do you know anything about Islamic history and what that involved? It's like, the crimes, of which there have been many, the crimes of white people just pale almost into insignificance against some of these other things.
Yeah, so, but you've described the immigration debate very well, like with what's happening in Australia. You see it in the US as well. In terms of the legal immigration that's happening. So much cheap foreign labor coming into the country. The left are happy about it because there's diversity, multiculturalism. That's for sort of a social reason. And then the right of politics seem to be happy about it because it brings cheap labor and that's good for their version of economics. And both are a complete betrayal. I think equally a betrayal. And I think that's been the struggle with a lot of signaling on the right, even since the Bondi terror attack. Where has the strong leadership been from anyone in the Liberal Party to come out and say there has to be a complete stop to immigration here, or there has to be a complete revisiting of what this multiculturalism looks like in Australia? There's been none of it. There's a bit of a discussion around lowering the numbers, all of that sort of thing, but there's no protection, as you said, of the ethnic identity of actual Australians. And you've seen that repeated across the rest of the Western world. And what it does lead to is a lot of discontent among the native people. And you're probably going to get a worse reaction from the people that you're trying to placate a lot of the time, because you're just not listening to them at all.
Yeah, I mean, like, it's the Bondi thing was particularly instructive. I mean, clearly the people who did it were Muslims, and not just Muslims. They actually had an ISIS flag in their car, which tells us that this had an Islamic motive. And when they asked the Prime Minister about it, the first thing he talks about is, "Oh yeah, we're doing what we can to shut down the neo-Nazis." It's like, I mean, whatever you think of neo-Nazis, and I don't think very much of them. It's like, what's saying, well, we're trying to deal with fire ants or something. It's like, what's this got to do with an Islamic terror attack? And then they've deported a guy who was apparently associated with these NSN guys. I don't know if it's true, but it seems to be that he wasn't a member or anything like that, but he'd actually gone and done some gym training with them or something like that.
Yeah,
Was
yeah,
like a friend and they deported him. He was I think he was English, and he'd
yeah.
been here for years. Like I think
Which,
he was a citizen, not a
yeah,
citizen. He was a permanent resident. I think I don't know the details of that, but I mean clearly the whole thing. And then they're going to have they've screamed and yelled for an inquiry into anti-Semitism and what was it?
violent
Something else.
extremism, I think it was.
I don't think it was even that, but anti-Semitism or something like that. The
Yeah.
words Islam or Islamic terror are just, we're not going to
Yep.
talk about that at all, despite the fact that that's what it actually was. And
Yep.
everyone knows that's what it was. And it couldn't be plainer,
Yeah.
So it's always this idea of, to me, it's just a blatant attack, either by, a deliberate attack or an omission on the founding white people, the founding white nation. And by nation, we like to describe a nation through which we use a sociological definition, which is an ethnic group in a homeland. So Australia is not just this dirt that I'm sitting on now; it's actually a group of people. So the nation is a group of people, and that's not. I mean, like as India is a group, is not just India. It's not just a geographic location. It's the Indian people, or China is the Chinese people, and so on and so forth. And so when we talk about that, and people say, "Oh, yeah, but Australia is the Aboriginals." Well, the Aboriginals formed a nation of sorts. That was an ethnic group living in the homeland.
They had
The Australia,
500 different nations.
yeah, but they were a group of an ethnic group that was living in a homeland, for better or for worse. Australia is formed by the British, who demographically massively outweighed the Aboriginals. I think that the treatment of the Aboriginals was generally fair. It wasn't perfect. Nobody's perfect. There was problems and this and that, but it wasn't. It was intended to be fair, and on an institutional level, it generally was fair. The mistakes were made, but so Aboriginals are actually assimilating into our nation. There's very few pure-blooded Aboriginals left. There are some. There's large numbers of people who claim to be Aboriginal who are actually at least a part, often a large part, and sometimes a massive part, Anglo or European, Anglo-Celtic. So the nation of Australia is an Anglo construct. It was built by the English originally and then expanded somewhat to the Europeans, and has been. We've had immigration from around the world, which has ramped up, but the basic nation is an Anglo construct, and that's not. So people are upset by this. It's all immigrants and it's all Aborigines. Like no. The nation. What we're talking about is the nation of Australia. The word Australia was coined by the British. It's I think it's a Latin term which means Great Southern Land, and the land was mapped by them. We colonized it. We settled it. We created the technology, the roads, the airports, the buildings, everything was created through, and the institutions as well. It are Anglo-Celtic and European-based institutions, and that it constitutes the nation. That doesn't mean that there were, as people point out, there were Afghan camel drivers and there were Chinese gold miners and things in the country, but the nation itself was predominantly, to the point, I think in 1945, it was in the very high 90s percent-wise of actually Anglo-Celts in Australia. And so by that time, the country was pretty much built. All the states were there, the major cities were there, the agriculture was there, the institutions were there. We had democratic institutions, we had the legal systems, and these were all based on English and Anglo-Celtic norms. And so when we talk about the nation, we're not saying, no, nobody else is involved in this. Yes, there have been, we've had Jewish governor generals, and there were, like I say, there were workers came from around the world. We had Japanese pearl divers and so on and so forth. But the nation in itself was overwhelmingly Anglo-Celtic. So,
Yes, 100%. And from the beginning as well, distinctly Christian. And that's something that people like to gloss over. And you talk about the dwindling Anglo-Celtic population basically since the Second World War. Obviously, it was peak around the start of the 1900s, sort of kept going throughout the First World War as well. But yeah, Australia was 96% Christian on Federation in 1901, and now it's about 40%. And the Anglo-Celtic population has pretty much mirrored that as well, which goes to show that as we've walked away from the founding moral framework and our founding ethnic population as well, our country has changed and it's degraded. Like,
Of course.
I don't think you can say, if we're having to have free speech suppression laws because we're multicultural, and Chris Menzies, New South Wales Premier, is so happy about the fact that we don't have the same free speech laws as the US because we're multicultural. It's like, hey, maybe if you can't speak your mind and you can't exercise a basic human right because everyone around you is so different in terms of their orientation and their culture toward life, that's not a good thing. Actually, no, we don't want that. We wouldn't mind a bit of a monoculture, which is the concerning thing because you've got people from the AFP coming out. I think the head of the or one of the spokespeople for the AFP prior to the Bondi attack was talking about rising right-wing extremism. And they're talking about these people are not defenders of Australia. They don't support our multicultural heritage. They are monoculturalists. And it's like, well, hold on. Does that mean if you want a common culture within a nation, which is basically the definition of a nation, you've got then you're a right-wing extremist and you're going to be attacked with free speech suppression laws or thrown into jail, as some of them have been. So it is very, very concerning, the fact that just speaking out about what our foundational values and our framework is as a country, and the fact that that's important to be able to fix a lot of the rot that we've seen, that can be a crime now. And I'm concerned about where the Royal Commission could lead as well, because they haven't done the terms of reference yet, but a lot of the objectives that have been stated, the Bondi terror attack itself is a small part of it. It's this overarching discussion about how terrorist attack didn't happen in isolation. It happened in a, environment of rising anti-Semitism. And it's like, well, that might be true, but are you seriously suggesting that those Muslim extremists would have had no reason to shoot up those Jewish people on Bondi Beach if it weren't for 16-year-olds sharing edgy memes on Instagram? Like, it's just complete and utter nonsense. And it goes to show as well, though, Tony Burke has sweeping powers as Home Affairs Minister. He can pull the trigger and within a couple of days have someone out of the country and basically barred from ever entering again. And he's done that time and time again, but he's unwilling to do it to the Afghan that has sexually assaulted, I think, 19 young girls. He's unwilling to do it to those that are committing crimes that aren't even citizens. So he's got all these powers and he's willfully not doing it because 30% of his electorate is Muslim and he does not want to upset them. He wants to pander to them. And it sort of goes to the issue with our ruling class at the moment. If you can have disagreements with people, but if they state what they believe in, then they're at least genuine disagreements. The ruling class, generally speaking, on the left and the right, have very little conviction. There's very little conviction at all. Yeah. So it's sort of just this endless game of pandering. You'll see Susan Leyer, you'll see Julian Lesser, you'll see the large part of the Liberal Party come out, do all these multicultural events, put the red dot in between their forehead on their forehead as well. All of this stuff that is just antithetical to what Australia actually is. They will pander to it because there's votes in it and there's power in it now. So it's very concerning. I mean, there's that old saying as well. If you want to know who's running the place, and you look at who you can't criticize. And that's sort of what's happening at the moment. You've got a race commissioner that is Indian. You've got overwhelming Indian immigration. And I just think it's important that we don't lose sight of where we were prior to Bondi, which was talking about immigration from a very distinct, hey, we've got an Australian nation that we want to protect here. Yeah. Okay. Muslims don't necessarily fall into that either. But I think what's happened since Bondi, everyone has sort of latched onto this. Oh, it's the Muslims versus the Jews, or it's the Muslims versus Australia. It's Australians for Australia. And what we want is a distinct ethnic and cultural and Christian nation. What we don't want is, but they're peaceful multiculturalists. No, we don't want that in our country either. Okay. Obviously it's better than, the Muslims shooting up people on a beach, but we're not playing the better of two evils. We've been doing that for 60 years now. We don't want either of it.
Yeah. There's the costs of diversity, like Robert Putnam, I think it was a Harvard professor. He did studies on this and he was very much on the left, and he actually suppressed his own work for a long time because he was embarrassed. But he eventually came out and said, look, diversity causes causes problems. It causes lack of trust and so forth,
Mm.
which is, to me, you don't need to be a Harvard professor to know that. You just need to live in a diverse area.
Yeah.
But what we've got really, I think, is an ethnic hierarchy with whites at the bottom, and people, the left plays this game where you look at the Australian Parliament, and you say, well, look, they're all white people in there. How disgraceful, they're all white people. It's like, yeah, but there isn't a single white advocate in the Parliament. There's no one can you think of anyone in the Parliament who advocates for white people? I mean, I can think of a few people who would advocate for Aboriginals. I can think of a few people who would advocate for Muslims, probably some that would advocate for Chinese or Indians, but there isn't a single person. And that's quite acceptable, of course. And then it's like, well, who advocates for white people? Well, no one. All these white people, not one of them would say, yes, I'm here to advocate for white people or, Anglo-Celts, whatever. I feel that the whole relationship is actually, I feel like it's an abusive relationship, that it has the hallmarks of narcissism to me. I'm not saying that these people are all narcissistic, but the tactics that they use are that, if you look at the way narcissists work, it's this constant belittling people, finding fault, blaming, shifting blame, refusing to accept blame, and so forth, which goes on just nonstop. These tactics are so similar to those of abusive narcissists. And I'm actually preparing a video as we speak on this subject. And I think what gives me hope is that if we look at the way narcissistic relationships it's usually that the abused people then start to twig, hang on, this isn't, I'm actually not a bad person. I'm not, this person's, they start off with a narcissist thinking that the narcissist is acting in good faith and is actually upset because they've done this or they've done that. And then by the end, they realize, no, hang on, this isn't good faith. This person's just actually using this as a form of abuse. And my belief is that our society is reaching that point where people are saying, hang on a sec, you don't actually care about racism. What you care about is power and oppressing us through this weaponized victimhood. And I think people are waking up to that. Everyone's waking up to this. People know it. And the result usually with narcissism is that the victim splits away from them. I suspect that our path will be following that kind of a path. It might not be pleasant, unfortunately. And it's not, this is something that we don't want, this unpleasantness, but we've really been forced into it we've been put in this position where there are, it's hard to see easy and painless solutions, but people will find solutions. I don't know what they'll be, but we are pulling away from this point where everyone thinks, oh yes. But then of course there's still the hard left who are like, oh yes, these poor oppressed, brown people, but everyone else is looking around and seeing Indians driving around in Mercedes and, and running the country and having large amounts of money and saying, what are you talking about? It's my kids who are being kept out of school or kept out of jobs or told by their teachers that they can't, they're guilty of, their ancestors are guilty of these horrendous crimes, when these other people whose ancestors have committed far worse crimes are told that they're the victims of all this. And I think people are, there's an awakening happening, and the BAC has tried to be at the forefront of that. And I think what you're doing here is a great job as well. So all power to you.
No, I appreciate it. But you're right. The ideology itself is falling in. And I think that's what people are talking about. You've got the people saying, the proponents of multiculturalism saying, all cultures are equal. But then they're also saying, oh, but the whites, or oh, but actual Australians, or all of that sort of stuff. So it's like, okay, well, clearly they're not all equal. And then we look around and we see the degradation of our country. We see acts happening in public that are meant for a bathroom. We see, generally speaking, the discourse, people aren't speaking English. You go to the shops and you're playing Spot the Aussie. All of this sort of stuff sort of goes to say, hey, maybe all cultures aren't equal. Maybe we actually had a good thing as Australians, and maybe we want that back. So I think that's the overwhelming movement that's coming. And like I said on a previous podcast that I'd done, you've got to be careful about the conditions you create. So these leftists, these Marxists, the conditions that they're creating are very similar, Harry, to what happened during the interwar period in Germany. You look at the Weimar Republic and what happened there was this social decadence. You had transgenderism on map, you had child brothels, you had horrible economic conditions because the Germans had to essentially self-harm given the reparations from World War One.
Mm.
And then what happens? You have this self-hatred, you have this basically banning of patriotism, banning of nationalism, and then there is a strong reaction that comes back the other way. And I think at the moment there are a lot of similarities. I mean, you look at the reparations for World War One in Germany per se, that just inflicted harm on the economy. That's essentially what we're doing with stuff like net zero. It's paying our dues to the global community to ensure that we are righteous enough to go forth. It's crippling our economy. It's making our people poor. And it's very worrying that the economic situation is similar. And then you look at the social side. We are doing, there's transgenderism in our classrooms, there's transgenderism en masse, prostitution, pornography, all of this sort of stuff is rife. You've got a government that's willing to take 16-year-olds off social media, off YouTube, but they're not willing to ban pornography. They're not willing to ban OnlyFans, which is pornography. So all of this sort of stuff, there are so many similarities to what happened in Germany prior to World War II. And it's very, very dangerous. And I can't help but think either these people are willfully ignorant and they're wanting that to happen for some reason, or they're just, got a blindfold on walking head first towards it, because there's always going to be a reaction the other way. And you've got to be careful what you wish for.
I think that they tend to like to create chaos because they operate in chaos well, and they'll try to destabilize it. They're trying to, it's a power grab, so they'll try to destabilize the regime. What a lot of people don't realize is that in those interwar period that you were talking about in Germany, one of the things that was happening was that the communists were on the streets when people had political meetings. So everything was broken down. A lot of people were having political meetings, and the communists, Antifa, which was founded then, and the other communists would come in and smash up these meetings, these political meetings. So no one could have a political meeting, with one exception, which was the brown shirts, who were tougher than the communists. So what they created was a sphere where the only two groups that could have any kind of political street presence, which were, in those days was the big thing, because we didn't have the internet and such like, were communists and fascists. And ended up with the fascists. People were terrified partly by the communists from what had happened in the Soviet Union or in Russia, and also Hungary. Is it Hungary, where Bela Kun took over, and various? And there were actually a couple of attempted revolutions, communist Marxist revolutions in Germany in those interwar periods, and so people, were gravitating towards the fascists because there was no alternative. So this is something that, again, we've actually seen this in Australia, which is I find shocking, that things are so bad that people would actually think that Nazism is a maybe a good thing. How bad must things be for people to get to that point?
Yeah, and that's the thing. It's a gradual build-up, isn't it, Harry? Because you've got, it basically gets to a point where the public are gaslit so much about the housing crisis, not being able to afford a house, grocery prices going up, all of this sort of stuff, working longer hours and essentially having less and less purchasing power. You've got that happening. And then you've got your people being ethnically replaced in their own country, and you're just being told, no, it's not a problem. And if you notice it, you're racist. And then it sort of boils down after years and years and years of people saying, hey, this is actually not a good thing. No, I don't want this. I want to be able to buy a house and raise my family and keep my country. That's it. How much of an ask is that? You've got the left and the right often coming together on a lot of these issues. You've got the left turning more and more towards socialism. You see that in New York with Mamdani. And you've got the right more and more looking at the social cohesion stuff, the social issues, and turning more and more towards Nazism. And what happens is you're creating riper and riper conditions, and essentially posing the question, okay, I'm going to be called, do I want this to happen to my country? The only thing that seems to stand in the way between me speaking out about this is someone calling me a racist, or someone calling me on the left a socialist. And people are just saying, okay, I don't care anymore.
Yeah.
And that's sort of where we get to when the public is just told that there's no problem. Shut up, do what you're told. You're not allowed to have a dissenting view. And if you do, we'll put you in prison, or we'll introduce new laws, which I'm afraid that they're going to do with the the Bondi Commission, the Royal Commission into Anti-Semitism. It's very concerning because the native public are having their civil liberties ripped away time after time because of foreign conflicts being imported onto our soil. And we don't want that here at all. So that's sort of where I think we're at the moment.
Yeah, it's very sad. And this is, I think it's part of the plan. There's some of the left, they thrive on this chaos. They don't want people, they see a society full of happy people who are doing well. That's the last thing they want. They're looking for power. And our societies were not well set up for individuals to grab power. So of course, this is, so as I say, I think if you read things like Saul Alinsky and people like that, and the communist sort of manifesto, it's always about violent revolution and this and that. It's sad that so many people have fallen for it, but I mean, they've been subjected to a very sophisticated mind control experiment, or program in my belief.
And what it is godless as well. Like it's just
absolutely,
it's godless. It's either, I mean, you get this on the ultra capitalist side where it's the worship of money to the exploitation of, basically the moral worth of individuals. And then you get it on the left as well, where it's, this anti-Christian, anti-God rhetoric, and setting up the society in a way that basically does impugn a lot of judgment on us from God. And again, I just bring it back to the fact that if you do not have a homogenous public that is oriented towards something even bigger than their nation, then that's not going to work. Yeah. And I think that's where a lot of people on the right do get it wrong in terms of basically worshipping ethnicity as the be-all, end-all is important, and it is what makes an Australian most of the time. But we can't ignore the fact that that Australia is a Christian country. Our laws are founded upon it. Our people have been overwhelmingly Christian for the majority of our existence as Australia. And that is what is going to return us back to some semblance of glory and actually reflecting God's glory in our public policy. I mean, you look at the failures of the conservative movement, which you generally align with, they're the Christian Bible bashers stuff over the last 30 years. They've just chalked up losses time after time after time. You see it with same-sex marriage. You see it with the transgender stuff in schools. You see it with the Racial Discrimination Act in 2013. All of these different things that have come in are overwhelmingly poor for the native population, and they do not reflect at all in our public policy Christ. They do not reflect the individual moral worth of people, but also this ability to have a nation. I mean, in the Great Commission, you called to go out and make disciples of all nations. And nations are a distinct group of people, like you say. I'd fall in line with your definition on that. And sometimes nations like Iran, like Iraq, would coalesce around, Islam, a different religion. We are based on Christianity and Christianity only. So this sort of pagan Nazism thing that's coming up as well, this godless socialism that's coming up, all of it, the Hindus coming in, the Muslims coming in, whatever it might be, we are a Christian country first and foremost, and a return to that and our original ethnic identity is the only way that we're actually going to solve any problems here.
I'm not a Christian, but I fully agree with you. I think that Christianity has been at the root of our culture. Some people say politics is downstream from culture. I think to an extent, culture is downstream from religions. I was brought up Christian and then abandoned it when I was in my teens. But I spent a fair bit of time, as I said, investigating Islam. I wrote a book on the subject. And when I did that, that was when it struck me. A lot of things struck me about Christianity, which I hadn't really realized. I was like, I'd just taken it as, it's just this, these people trying to tell me what to do and impose their view on me. But when I actually I looked at a different religion, and then it's like when you try and learn another language and you realize, we don't have to do things this way. We don't have to say things this way. We can actually say it in a different way. And it surprised me. And there was a lot of things that I find in the Bible which I'd originally thought about just briefly and thought, I don't like the sound of that. Doesn't sound very good. And then on thinking more about it, you think, actually, that is right. Like, for instance, the 10 Commandments. I was always struck by the first commandment, which says, "I am a jealous God. You shall have no other gods besides me. You shan't worship any other gods." Now, to me, I was like, well, jealousy is that's not really a very positive thing. Jealousy is, we always think of jealousy as not being a good thing. And then one day it struck me that I can't remember what set me off, but I thought, hang on a sec, if you've got a set of rules, what's the first rule? Well, the first rule is these are the rules, and you won't have any other rules. Now,
What is the source of these authority?
What's the source of the rules?
Yeah.
It is God. It's the Christian God. So if you have a different God, you have a different set of rules. So rule number one is these are the rules. You have no other rules. If you're gonna be a Christian, in that day it was Jewish, whatever. If you want to follow, you're going to follow me as God. These are the rules, and you need to follow them. So and it was like, wow, like it's suddenly it's like, I think there's so many things that I've seen in Christianity like that, where at first blush you think, oh yeah, that seems stupid, but when you really drill down, they're actually really profound and really important things in Christianity. And many people, I think, most people, most people just don't have time to think these things through. I mean, none of us have time to think everything through, but we have a book there, the Bible, and this culture of Christianity, which if you just follow it, just say, oh, I've got a conundrum here, a quandary. What do I do? Well, let's have a look in the Bible. Oh, this is what I'm supposed to do. And that, there's so much wisdom in this book. And by abandoning that, suddenly people are coming up with this, worshipping the earth. And then it's, global warming and, killing babies.
The universe is telling me something.
Yeah. All this stuff, like things like, these people who are like, like supposedly really caring, people, and you say, well, look, if we have a baby that's born in a termination and the baby's actually born alive, should we just allow that baby to die? And I go, yeah, absolutely. So you'd leave the baby there just in a stainless steel petri dish to just die? Yeah. It's like, really?
Yeah.
How?
And you're right to touch on the 10 Commandments, and that informs the morality of nations and a lot of lawmaking, and that is so important. It is the bedrock of our civilization. And then you see Christ's Sermon on the Mount in Matthew, and it talks about the individual aspects of that, and it's sort of like an even further moral framework. Talking about, you've heard it said that thou shalt not commit adultery. I tell you that if you look at another woman with lust, then you have committed adultery in your heart. So it really goes to the heart posture and this self-examining of your own motives, not just looking at actions. Christ doesn't necessarily care about the outward actions per se if the inward posture is corrupt. I think that is what the Sermon on the Mount so beautifully, and it is a complete font of wisdom for the Christian, for the human being to look at and say, yeah, well, what is causing these? What are my motives that it's causing my outward actions, or am I covering my inward motives with outward actions? All of this deception stuff, it's a form of lying. So the incredible wisdom that is found all throughout the Bible, particularly in the Sermon on the Mount, has been abandoned. And it's not just, and I think it's been abandoned by people who are happy enough to abandon Christ, but not Christian values per se. And I know it's a tricky one, but it sort of goes to the 10 Commandments. Okay, well, what is the source of this wisdom? If we abandon that source overall, we are incurring judgment upon ourselves, but we're also meaning that there can be compromise on all of these different values, because who's to say they can't change if we've already abandoned the source of them? So I think the native population 100% have to be oriented toward Christ on the whole, and it's a tough thing. But this is the reason why it is called the Great Commission. We must make disciples of all nations, and we should certainly start with our own. And we want to preserve Australia for Australians, but if we are Australia for Australians and we are godless, then we will be useless. We will be useless toward bringing any good to ourselves, bringing good to our fellow man, and bringing good throughout the rest of the world. I mean, you can't do that when your country itself isn't reflecting Christ's glory at all. So I just think that that's so important. We cannot afford to abandon Christ necessarily on a personal level, but also as a nation. It's what has guided us forward and also elevated our thoughts, our public policy, our actions toward one another to such a higher standard than it would otherwise if we're not accountable to anyone.
I actually think, I don't want to apportion blame here, but I think Christians have been very, very poor at selling their message. Um, Sadly, I think that they've packaged it really badly. It's like, the sort of, this sort of, I don't know. I always felt it was like you have to give up all the bad things to be a Christian. But
No.
if you look into Christian doctrine, that's not actually the truth. It's like we are all sinners, and what you have to do is not give up, not be a perfect person. This sort of thing. The Christians, they give you the impression that if you're going to be a Christian, you're going to be perfect, which is, I think, is a really wrong-headed way to.
Yes.
I think it's completely wrong. It's like, the whole point of Christianity is, look, we're all sinners, but as a Christian, what you're going to do is have a go, at being better. That doesn't mean you're going to be better. Okay, you're going to fail. It's like telling someone, if you go on this diet, you have to never eat another cream cake. All right. Whereas, a better sort of approach, which is the true Christian approach, is like,
Yeah.
look, I want you to actually have a go at being on this diet. Like, I know
Yeah.
you might fail, it doesn't matter. But if one person has a go at a diet and fails completely, that's fair enough. But if you have 100 people who attempt to go on a diet and 100 people who don't bother, which group's going to be more successful? And not all of them will. There might be people in the I don't give a damn camp who actually succeed, and people on the I'm going to have a go camp that fail.
Yeah.
But overall, like if you get 100 people who are Christian who say I'm going to try and be good, and you compare that to another 100 people who say, well, I'm atheist and I don't give a damn, I'll just do what I want.
Yeah.
You would expect that the Christians would come up with would generally be more, their values would be more in line, or their actions would be more in line with their values. Not perfectly.
100.
And that to me is a fantastic idea, rather than,
Yeah.
that whole paradigm is great. Whereas I don't think Christians have sold that properly. My own personal experience was, I kind of felt like, well, I'm not good enough to be perfect, so I'm just going to drop it. I don't want all the judgment and everything like that, rather than thinking, well, I can be a Christian and I can still do these bad things, but look, at least I'm going to say, right, I'm going to have a go, and you pray to God and say, look, God, help me, which, whether there's a God or not, even if there wasn't a God, I'm sure that actually praying to someone that you believe was a God and asking him for help, just that psychological thing is going to improve you,
Yeah, I mean, it goes even deeper than that, and that's the beauty of it as well, Harry. Is that you're not trying to clean yourself, dust yourself off, make yourself perfect outside of Christ, and then going to Christ. You're right. That's a terrible message. We are only, as Christians, when we talk about righteousness, we're only righteous in Christ. We are complete failures. We are complete sinners outside of Him, and our actions change because of the reality that we are righteous in Christ. So you're so right. The actions do matter, but they are a result of the coming to Christ and the putting the faith in something that is so much more capable. The person that has the God-man that lived the perfect life that we cannot, that no Christian ever can and ever will, but we're imputed through Christ's actions before the Father as righteous. I like to say it's the greatest love story of all time, that God would send His only Son to die for us, and that through Him, through our faith in Him, we are then made righteous. And obviously, when you have that faith, and that's the boiling motive in your heart every single day when you wake up. Some days will be, it'll be boiling hotter than other days. But if that is the motive, then the actions are going to follow. And that's what we've seen throughout human civilization. If the motive is there, if the strong-held belief is there, that's where the actions are going to go. So I couldn't agree with you more. We've done, as Christians, a very poor job in basically professing the gospel, which is believe in Christ, have faith. It is through faith and grace alone that we are saved in Christ. And then because of that reality, the process of sanctification ensues, where you want to reflect that reality. You want to reflect your gratitude toward Christ, toward God for having such mercy on you, that you walk out every single day, or try to walk out every single day and fail every single day. But like you say, the result is a far better end result. But that doesn't change at all, whether you're a bad Christian or, when you have the bad day or when you have the really good day and you think you do 95% of things reflecting Christ's glory compared to maybe 20, that doesn't change the original reality which is that you're found and you're saved in Christ. And that is the ultimate thing. You're so right. It's not a cleaning yourself to get that. You don't have to do anything. You can't do anything to be worthy of that. I am not worthy of it, but God has deemed that through Christ, I can have that. And then that's sort of where you get that purpose, and the actions come from there. So yeah, it's pretty awesome. And you just described like that, and described very poorly by me, it is still the greatest way to form a civilization. It's the greatest way to live out your life and reflect the glory and the truth and the wisdom that you spoke about that's found all throughout the Bible.
And I think the argument that's rather specious argument is that they'll say, well, look, there's this guy here who's not a Christian and he's actually been a really good guy. And then there's this guy over here and he is a Christian and he's been a terrible person.
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, but this guy was having a go, and the other guy wasn't. And there will be situations. It doesn't mean that everyone who becomes a Christian becomes a great person. There will be people who are actually genuine Christians who are really bad, in their actions, not good people, but they're having a go. And like I say, when you take a group of people and you say, right, these guys are all going to have a go and these guys aren't going to bother, you're going to have a better result from the guys who are having a go. And I think that's where people, I think from my own personal thing, it's like, that's the thing that I struggle with and a lot of people struggle with, that, I can be a good person and not a Christian. It's like, yeah, absolutely you can. I don't think I'm a particularly bad person, but I think that a group of people who are Christian, who are trying to live in a Christian way, will tend to live in a more Christian way than people who aren't.
Yes.
Particularly over time, because often what people are comparing is people who are from a Christian background, who've abandoned Christianity and will still keep that moral compass for quite some time. So whereas if you look and you go to countries which have never been Christian, like Somalia or Afghanistan or places like that, people talk about Buddhism, but you go to Laos or Thailand and you look at the Japanese during World War II, it's Buddhism to me is like it's kind of like, well, they don't really have a God. They profess some of the same kind of things as Christianity, but it's without the God thing. To me, it's like having a set of laws but no police. It's like, why would you keep the laws if there's no consequence? Whereas Christians believe that there is a consequence, and so they're more likely to act in a more sort of Christian way. So
yeah, and
anyway,
you're right to point out though that there is and Christians often do a poor job of actually explaining the difference between salvation and sanctification, which is sort of what I went over there. The salvation is always completely undeserved from the Christian, that is being saved in Christ through faith, by faith and through grace alone. And then the sanctification is, given that reality, your orientation toward life necessarily has to be, you've got this inward drive to reflect this incredible reality that has changed for you. And then the sanctification process is the prayer, it is the reading of the Bible, it is the trying to best reflect Christ's glory that has been given to you through no works of your own, in your works, because that is something you can do, because you can't work your way to salvation. That's not a thing. But through that grace, through that faith, you have a changed reality, you have a changed heart, and then the sanctification process ensues. And I think a lot of Christians that are down the road in that sanctification process get so worked up in their own, and I do it too, get so worked up in their own battles day to day and trying to reflect that glory and that reality that Christ has, that righteous and perfect through him, that we forget step one, which is the only step that truly matters in terms of eternity. So you're right. It's often a message that is poorly conveyed, but still somehow numbers multiply. So goes to show the truth.
Young men in particular are turning to the church now, apparently, which I find very heartening.
Yeah, 100%.
We're on about an hour, again, towards an hour and a half. I think we probably should cut that short. So Edward, it's been a fantastic talk. We've covered a lot of ground, some that we weren't expecting to, I think. But it's been great talking, and we'd love to keep in touch. So where can people reach you if they want to sign up with your unions, and what unions do you have?
Yeah, awesome. Can sign up on redunion.com.au. If you use code Schuller, just my last name, you get $100 off for any of the unions. So we've got the Nurses Professional Association, Teachers Professional Association, AMPS, which is a doctors one, and then SOPA, which is coppers and fireys, and then IWA as well, which is sort of a catch-all. So if you need help there, you can sign up there. In terms of myself, obviously on YouTube, Edward Schuller, and across X, Instagram, and Facebook as well, Edward Schuller.
Excellent. So if you're interested in the BAC, British Australian Community.com.au is where we live. So I'll say goodbye to you now, and thanks so much for joining me. That was a wonderful chat.
Cheers, Harry. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.